Everyone is looking at the headlines. They see the breakthroughs, the stock spikes, the lab coats. But they miss the signal. The real story isn't the science, it's the money waiting underneath it. 25 innovations? That's the number everyone is talking about. But if you only watch the news, you're seeing the surface. The ocean is moving somewhere else. We need to look at the incentives driving these changes, because when the money moves, the future follows. It wasn't the breakthroughs that moved markets, it was the silence around them. While headlines celebrated CRISPR edits and mRNA vaccines, venture capital quietly shifted. Funding flowed not to the flashiest labs, but to startups solving regulatory bottlenecks, like scalable biomanufacturing and real-time toxicity screening. Why? Because investors realized innovation is not in the petri dish, but in the gap between discovery and approval. The real turning point wasn't a scientific leap, it was capital recognizing that without infrastructure, even the best ideas stall. Most missed it because they were watching the wrong metric. Novelty, not viability. The future of biotech isn't just being invented in labs, it's being funded in boardrooms that finally understand execution is the bottleneck, and that changes everything. Then came the shift no one saw coming. Data stopped being a byproduct, it became the asset. The more patient information a company gathers, the harder it is to displace them. Not because their drug is better, but because they now own the longitudinal record of your biology. You don't just get treated. You get tracked for years, maybe decades, and that's not a side effect, it's the business model. The real lock-in isn't chemical, it's continuous, and once you're in, leaving means starting over, with no one else holding your full history. It wasn't just about who got funded first, it was who got funded fastest. A single lab in Boston cut its trial timeline from 5 years to 18 months by skipping long-term toxicity screens. Investors cheered, the stock jumped 30%, but 6 months later, 3 patients developed unexplained liver damage. No one had looked for it, because the incentive was speed, not safety. The system rewarded velocity, not vigilance, and that's when the real signal appeared. Innovation wasn't failing despite the rush, it was being reshaped by it. They rushed to patent, not to cure. The first red flag appeared in 2018, when 6 and 8% of top biotech filings cited market exclusivity as the primary goal. Not patient outcomes, labs began designing trials not to answer hard questions, but to hit regulatory checkpoints fast enough to lock in 20-year. Monopolies, investors rewarded speed over substance, because exits happened before long-term data could even be collected. The breakthroughs were real, but the system optimized for the wrong finish line. What looked like innovation was often just a well-timed sprint to the patent office, leaving the hardest problems untouched. The law moves slow. Biotech doesn't wait. Right now, therapies built on gene edits, AI-designed proteins, and synthetic biology are being tested in clinics. While the approval framework still assumes small molecules and decade-long trials, companies aren't breaking rules out of malice. They're following incentives, move fast, capture value, iterate in real time. Regulators, bound by precedent and risk aversion, can't keep pace. Not because they're incompetent, but because the system was never built for this speed. So who bears the burden when the gap widens? Not the investors, not the CEOs. It's the patient signing the consent form, hoping the science outpaces the bureaucracy. Small labs are vanishing, not because their ideas failed, but because the price to prove them got too high. Big Pharma isn't waiting for breakthroughs, they're snapping up pipelines early, locking down future treatments before they leave the garage. It's not about the science anymore, it's about who gets to decide what reaches patients, and when a handful of companies control the flow, they don't just shape innovation, they shape access. That's the quiet shift most missed. The real innovation wasn't in the lab, it was in the boardroom. They weren't just filing patents, they were building exit strategies. One startup filed 477 provisional claims in under 2 years, most were for diagnostics, few ever aimed at curing anything. Investors wanted returns in quarters, not decades. So labs pivoted, shorter trials, faster licensing, cleaner slides for pitch decks. The science stayed real, the goal didn't. When venture interest faded, the patents didn't vanish. They just sat, waiting, while the people who needed the tech kept waiting too. The signal wasn't in the press releases, it was in the fine print of the term sheets, where innovation met incentive and lost. It wasn't about saving lives first, it was about who could sell fastest. Investors didn't back therapies, they backed liquidity events. A startup's value wasn't tied to patient outcomes, but to how quickly it could attract a big pharma buyout. Labs began designing trials not for efficacy, but for acquisitive appeal, short endpoints, clean biomarkers, narrow populations. The goal shifted from healing to handing off, and when the exit came, the science often got shelved, not because it failed, but because it didn't fit the acquirer's pipeline. That's the quiet distortion, innovation optimized for transfer, not transformation. The real cost? We're building a system that rewards the flip, not the fix. The headlines are noise. The incentives are the signal. If you want to see what comes next, look deeper. Follow for more sharp breakdowns like this.